Welcome, everyone. My name is Carla Carpenter. I'm with the Capacity Building Center for States. I serve as our CQI data and research manager here at the center, as well as our lead on the Federal Child and Family Services Review. On behalf of my colleagues co-leading the session today with me, we are very excited to dive in with you this afternoon to focus on strategies to include family and youth voice in the Federal Child and Family Services Review. Next slide, please. So we recognize that some folks in today's session may be a little newer to the CFSR, and so we just wanted to set the stage with a little bit of background information on what the CFSR is and why it's important. The Federal Child and Family Services Review, or CFSR for short, is a comprehensive improvement process. Through the CFSRs, the Children's Bureau works with states to help ensure that states are meeting federal child welfare requirements, and Children's Bureau works with states to understand the overall functioning of their child welfare system and improve safety, permanency, and well-being outcomes for children and families. The CFSR process is designed to be a continuous quality improvement process. It's not a standalone kind of compliance type of review process. It really is built and designed from the ground up to be and to support continuous improvement of practice and outcomes. And as you've heard today throughout the day, young people, parents, and caregivers are such a critical part of the process of supporting system change and improved outcomes. And that's true within the Federal Child and Family Service Review process as well. So again, we're really excited that all of you have joined us this afternoon. And I am very excited to introduce our first presenter this afternoon, Yolanda Fripp, who is with the CFSR unit within the Division of Performance Measurement and Improvement within the Children's Bureau. So welcome, Yolanda.
Good afternoon. Thank you. And I'll be talking to you this afternoon about some of the guiding principles that we'd like to see as we kick off round 4. This round will be focusing on youth and parents and caregivers with lived experience. So some of our guiding principles are that families and youth are the best source of information, that shared decision-making and planning increases engagement, and empowering youth and families to make critical decisions in their lives will help bring about, improved outcomes for child welfare systems. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we know about youth voice are that improvement to organizations and some of the things that we know for benefits of both organizations with persons with lived experience are that there are improvements to an organization's cultural responsiveness. It supports autonomy, resiliency, and well-being of persons with lived experience. They involve persons with lived experience in program evaluation for better results. It involves them as key partners in decision-making. It drives sustained collaboration of a broad range of stakeholders, and it empowers them to take initiative and build accountability. So some of the things that we'd like to see during the CFSR as persons with lived experience involved in are the CFSR planning efforts, from the statewide assessment to case level interviews, for stakeholder interviews, for PIP development and implementation, and to be a part of any ongoing other system improvement activities. Next slide, please. And here you can move to the next slide. All right. So some of the things that we'd like to see, or some of the ways that states can help operationalize this for round 4, are by canvassing the youth, recruiting the youth, and working with the youth. The key to sustained improvement of persons with lived experience will be to engage often and early and ensure that young people with lived experience are prepared for this work. I cannot emphasize enough the preparation of the youth and young people with lived experience for this work. Next slide. Also, in operationalizing parent and caregiver voice, I identifying the parents with offering opportunities and engaging with the parents, again, often and early, will be a key component for sustained involvement with persons of lived experience throughout the round of CFSR. Next slide, please. Some other considerations are supporting inclusivity, locating people with lived experience, and overcoming obstacles and barriers. States should not be afraid to think outside of the box. In some ways, this may resemble a grassroots effort where states will have to go to the community and engage with the people. States should start thinking now about established partnerships that they can leverage to begin setting the foundation for this work. Also, they should begin to think of any barriers or obstacles that may exist and begin thinking of some creative ways to eliminate them. For example, having meetings in the community versus the community having to come to like state offices to participate. And with that, I think I'll be handing it off to Mary Kate.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. I'm just going to jump in real quickly. I just wanted to thank you for that great information. And I know it's tough when the voice isn't cooperating, so really appreciate you hanging in there with us today. And that was really a great set of information to start our conversation today. It is my pleasure to welcome my colleagues, Mary Kate Myers. Mary Kate is a youth support lead with the Division X Targeted Technical Assistance Project. And April Pieper, who is a National Family Leadership Consultant with the Capacity Building Center for States. Among the many things that Mary Kate and April do on behalf of the Center for States and Division X, they have been leaders in the development of today's SWEVE and this session in particular, but really with the entire SWEVE conference. So thank you both for that. And Mary Kate, I am going to turn things over to you next.
Thanks so much, Carla. Would you mind advancing to the next slide, please? Thank you. So today we're just going to briefly go over the continuum of youth and family engagement. There are different models out there, but this is what we use at the center. So it starts off with informing, which includes providing families information about performance, improvement efforts, or solutions. Next step up is consult, which is gathering feedback on specific performance issues, root causes, and suggestions for improvement. Another step up is involve. Engage families regularly to ensure their concerns and perspectives are being understood and heard. Collaborate, partnering with families in each aspect of decision-making, really sharing that power. And then co-leading. Through co-leadership, families and agency leadership share decision-making authority to drive CQI and implementation. Systems may be at different levels of engagement along this continuum at different times, and it really just provides an opportunity to kind of see how to get to that next step. Next slide, please. And so today we have a polling question for all of you. It should be popping up on your screen soon, but our question today is, where is your agency currently on the continuum of youth and family engagement for your systems change work? A, informing families and young people about systems change and performance improvement efforts. B, consulting with families and young people to gather input or feedback on specific issues, programs, or areas of need. C, involving families and young people on a regular and ongoing basis to understand their perspectives and concerns. D, collaborating with families and young people to develop solutions and inform agency decisions. Or E, co-leading with families and young people to share decision-making and guide change and implementation work on an ongoing basis. We see that there are quite a few responses coming in, but we'll wait until we're at a higher percentage of folks' responses. So far, what's leading the pack is consulting with families and young people to gather input or feedback. That's at about 32% right now, but we'll see how it lands. Oh, and we also see in the chat that there actually is missing an option of none of the above. So I guess that is an opportunity to start somewhere. Definitely can reach out to some of us and see some of those starting strategies. And the results are still coming in, so we'll just give that another minute. All right, and with we'll go over the results now. With about 55% of folks participating, we landed with 36% of folks sharing that they are consulting with families and young people to gather information, followed by involving families and young people on a regular and ongoing basis. Thanks so much for participating in that, y'all. And I will turn it back over to Carla.
Thank you so much, Mary Kate. And thanks everyone for participating in the poll as well. In terms of thinking about that continuum of youth and family engagement, organizations will be at different points on that continuum at different times, and maybe your organization hasn't yet started up that step ladder, that continuum of support, and that's okay. The CFSR is an opportunity to really think about what engagement of youth and families can look like in terms of helping to support systems improvement in your organization. So I'm going to ask all of you as we go to the next slide to think about the steps up that continuum of family and youth engagement. And the question that's there on the slide in the green box, I'm going to ask you to imagine that your organization or your state is working toward that co-leadership of the Federal Child and Family Services Review with young people and families, co-leading the CFSR work with you. What would that look like for your organization? What would we see your organization or state doing if you were reaching toward that co-leadership level? So please share your thoughts with us in the chat in response to that question. And Mary Kate and April, while folks are sharing their thoughts in the chat on that question, I know our participants would love to hear from you as our experts. What are your thoughts on what meaningful and authentic engagement with young people and families can look like in context of the Federal Child and Family Services Review? Mary Kate, perhaps we can start with you on that one.
Thanks so much, Carla. So there's a lot of thoughts that come to mind when I think about what meaningful and authentic engagement can look like. But one of the first things that comes to mind is really going beyond checking the box, creating that culture shift and being intentional, authentic, and offering an equal partnership. It also includes engaging early and often. That includes utilizing technology, including young people and families still in care and still involved with the system, sharing results and products and closing the feedback loop, building the table with them, not inviting them to yours, really setting the ground rules together. And also being cautious of asking too much and respecting folks' boundaries. It's also important to meet folks where they're at. Having those materials when we're training folks be reader friendly, using common language that people with lived experience can understand. And people with lived experience can help design and inform these materials. I also think of the some of these opportunities look like providing training on topics being covered, describing the CFSR and its multiple steps and processes. And when we're meaningfully engaging folks, we are also making sure that their immediate needs are being met. If we're engaging them and they are challenged with not having a home, really making sure that we're getting those basic needs met before we're diving deeper. Meaningful and authentic engagement also looks like real strong relationships built around trust, a psychologically safe space. They're transparent and there's open communication. There's bidirectional learning, and there's connecting as humans, really bringing the human back into the work and taking a few minutes to check in on one another. That can also include identifying a safety plan, really making sure that when we are encouraging folks to engage with us, that they understand that this can bring up some hard feelings, some tough emotions, and to really have a plan together to support. It's also important that we provide opportunities. asking folks what they'd like to be involved in after providing information on different topics, as well as fair compensation and offering flexibilities like meeting outside of regular work hours, offering childcare, transportation, technology, etc. It also looks like diverse outreach and engagement strategies, especially when we're thinking about reaching communities and populations that we don't typically engage with. We really need to get creative and think outside of the box. And then finally, I think it's really important when we're thinking about meaningful and authentic engagement to consider those possible roles in professional development that we can offer. Some possible roles for folks can look like gathering data and evidence, providing input in systemic factor functioning, being a peer leader, which means engaging their peers for further engagement with the agency, as well as preparing them. They can also help develop training materials, work with states to monitor goal progress and determine whether PIP strategies and activities are creating positive change, and more. But it's really important that we look beyond just the one engagement and really try to identify other opportunities as well.
Thank you so much, Mary Kate. Those were some really great considerations for our participants. April, I know that Yolanda talked a little bit about some of the benefits for jurisdictions if they do this work well. Wondering if you have some additional thoughts that you would want to share on that topic as well.
Absolutely. I do think that there are many benefits to jurisdictions. Part of the CFSR process really is about considering the problems, the obstacles, the concerns that your child welfare staff are trying to help families solve. The best way to help somebody solve a problem is to really understand from their perspective what the problem is. Too many times we think we know what the problem might be, and then we spend a lot of time putting solutions into place and monitoring the solutions and collecting the data. And we get to the other end and we realize that, we isolated the wrong problem or went the wrong direction on a solution. The best way to solve that problem is to include those folks from the very beginning, to understand the situation and the circumstances from their perspective and what they feel they need in order to overcome the problem that they can identify. I think that's probably the strongest partnership that can be obtained by including lived experience voice, is that we get the problem right from the start and we can collaborate on the solutions.
Thank you so much, April. And I wanted to lift up, Raven had some great suggestions in the chat and thinking about what this work can look like in jurisdictions if you're working toward that co-leadership model in the CFSR with young people and families. She mentions creating and cultivating spaces that are inclusive and allowing people to show up authentically and authentically engaging them before, during, and after the process. And I think that piece is so critical in terms of not only providing the space to hear from individuals with lived expertise, but also then reaching back and being really clear about how what we're learning is being used to support and strengthen system processes and policies and practice, and ultimately to improve the way that we serve children and families. So great points, Raven. Really appreciate that. All right, if we can go to the next slide, we have some additional questions for folks. And please keep the comments and thoughts coming in the chat in terms of ways, strategies and opportunities for engaging young people and families in the CFSR, and what that co-leadership model can look like. I think it's so important for us to go into this round of the Federal Child and Family Services Review with a clear vision for how we hope to accomplish this work in our organization. So really loving the ideas coming in via the chat. We do have another question here on the slide for participants to consider also, and maybe weigh in on the chat as well. And that is, what are some of the barriers to meaningful engagement of young people and families that you're concerned about or worried about for CFSR Round 4? What are some of those things that you really want to keep at the forefront in your planning that you're anticipating may be potential barriers? And then while folks are sharing their thoughts on that question in the chat, April, I'm going to start with you this time and ask, how can states ensure the populations that they serve are represented in the CFSR process?
I think it's extremely important that we understand that we want lived experience at the table from the very start. I know there's some interesting conversation going on in the chat. I'm trying to kind of watch that and make sure I don't miss my cues at the same time. But understanding that individuals with lived experience are a value add to the entire process. It's not nice to have lived experience. You really must have lived experience at the table. Again, the perspective is vital. The experiences are vital. These are individuals that have lived through whatever challenges they were facing, and they managed to overcome the barriers with supports or created their own supports sometimes along the way. I know that we've had to do that a time or two. So to be at the table from the very beginning, so that you are part of what Yolanda said in terms of shared decision making and shared planning. It's important to build relationships with youth and families, and you don't do that 5 minutes before you think you need them. You do that all the time. So it's an ongoing relationship building. Start early and engage in that process often. Consider your grassroots groups, networks, your mentors, your support groups. Those are where you'll find a lot of your lived experience voices. They bring a humanity to the table. They bring a personal story to the table that a lot of our agency staff just don't have that experience. They don't have that voice. When you're thinking about recruiting them for CFSR work, think about including them across the board. What are other special events or activities or committees or work teams that perspective could be very helpful to you if you include them? Think about the shared problem solving, the shared decision making. That input is vital and important.
Thank you so much, April. I really appreciate that. And I do want to lift up just a few comments from the chat that we're seeing as well, that it's not just about the policy, and youth need to trust the people that they're sharing their lived experience with. And I think this gets at something at the core of the next question that we have here on the slide, which is, how can states engage historically marginalized populations in the CFSR? And I think it's most especially important that we reach out to individuals and communities that have been historically marginalized or harmed by our system. So how can states effectively engage these populations in the CFSR? Mary Kate, do you want to take this one first?
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Carla. So I want to backtrack a little bit. When I was sharing some of those strategies that folks can use to meaningfully and authentically engage, I didn't mean that those were the end all be all. I think there's a lot of possibilities, and it's really as creative as you can get. Those are just some of the ones I wanted to highlight. There have been some additional wonderful ones in the chat that I wanted folks to go back and look at. But when seeing how states can engage historically marginalized populations in the CFSR, I think it's important to start with acknowledging the historical trauma and harm that's been done. Even if it wasn't created by you yourself, really just being able to sit down and have that conversation of, we recognize that this has been your experience and we want to change that. Share why, and also be willing to understand that folks may not be ready to engage. It's also important to partner with community providers and leaders, really leveraging those connections that already exist within the community. These folks may be able to share some different considerations to have in mind while you're working with groups, as well as different strategies to engage. It's also important to be really transparent about the engagement opportunity and what the goal is and how their feedback will be used, as well as closing that feedback loop and making sure that we're really informing and following up with folks. It's also important to provide outreach in multiple ways, utilizing technology, utilizing those community partners, really meeting folks where they're at and trying to identify how you can communicate with them in a style that's most preferred for them. And again, engaging early and often, ongoing throughout the process, not just a one-time thing. It's also important to offer training, preparation sessions, debrief sessions, and really create some kind of a safety plan for folks so that if they are experiencing some challenges, if they are feeling unheard, that they're able to talk about that and debrief with someone. It's also important to include some of these historically marginalized populations when looking at policies, trainings, and other systems that are in place. Really having the opportunity to work with these people, work with these folks in these populations to be able to create training materials to identify any unintended harm that might be happening in lieu of some services or some policies that are in place. And most importantly, putting the human back into the work, taking time to really connect with one another and build that relationship, not just passing someone off to the next social worker or just getting right to business, but really taking that time to check in. How are you today? Are there any challenges that you've been experiencing? How can I support you? Really just making sure that we're remembering that although our work is fast-paced, that there are human lives that are being affected, and we really want to make sure to check in with them. And I'll pass this over to Yolanda.
Hi, Mary Kate. Thank you. And I'd just like to add and reemphasize that the representation of voices should look like the population of people that agencies serve. And oftentimes, we at the agencies, and I come from a practice background, so I can truly speak to this. We often want to put those people front and center who we think are good representatives of the agencies, and sometimes those personalities just don't mesh with the personalities of those in the communities of the people that we are trying to reach. So really taking a look at your staff, at who you're putting out there in the front and center, that are going to inform people about the CFSR, again, that have the personality to build a rapport with those communities, I think will be key in order to engage those communities. Because what you don't want to do is offend people right off the bat, so to speak. But again, to really build those, like Mary Kate said, those authentic relationships. And it's got to be often, it's got to be ongoing. And you can't just start 5 minutes before it's time for you to do your CFSR. It's going to be more than just doing a survey or having a focus group, and really ensuring that you're hearing what people are saying. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. These are all really great considerations. And there are also some really great points coming forward in the chat as well. And I know we are almost down on our time here. So I have one more question, and I'm just going to ask you each for a very brief response. But next slide, please. If you could give us one key strategy in a few words that you hope folks will walk away from today's session with in terms of preparation for young people, parents, or caregivers, or preparation within agencies. And someone lifted this point up in the chat as well, that it's about preparing staff to potentially hear sensitive or uncomfortable feedback at times. What is one key strategy for preparation?
I'm not sure who you want to start, so I'll jump. I think that for both groups, part of the preparation process has to be clear expectations and a focus on why we do the work and why we're at the table, and what our a common goal is. I think that you have to make that clear and remind folks of that often. Everybody's at the table for a reason. Everybody has a perspective. Everybody's equally important, and just make sure that that's first and foremost.
April, I think that really captured it. Really understanding the why is so important to this work. And I do know that we are actually right now at time for this session. So I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join this afternoon, and really appreciate everyone's insights and thoughts in the chat. Thank you for participating in the conversation. I know that they will end our session for us here abruptly if we don't end it ourselves. So I just want to thank you all. Our next session will start up in about 5 minutes. So hence the desire to end things right on time. And again, appreciate everyone joining us for the session today. If you could go to the next slide, please. That next session will begin promptly at 3:50. So we will see you all over there. Thank you. And thank you to our panel as well.